I don't know if you guys are ready for all of these opinions. And there are so many of them to be had. So without further delay, to Saltville. Choo choo! All aboard the Bitch Express! It's Leanne and welcome back to another video. Today we are back with a very special installment of Tops and Bottoms, and it's very special because it's the first one in a while. We are in a slightly different filming location today, partly because I wanted to test it out and see how it looks, and partly because we have a really sickly puppy right now. If you have seen my vlogs before or some of my live streams, you will know that this is my living room. These are my horror shelves. If you're new to my channel, you might not know what Tops and Bottoms is because it's been a while since we did one around here. In fact, specifically, it has been since I started mood reading again. You see what happens there? Mood reading happens, finishing books does not happen, and neither does wrap-ups. Yeah, it's a very destructive cycle. But this month we have a TBR, and so I figured it was time to get back on my game and start bringing you back my Tops and Bottoms. Tops and Bottoms is the way in which I wrap up usually just my last reading month, but in this case, you know, a little bit more than that, by telling you only about the tippy-toppest, bestest books that I have read in that month, and the bottomiest bottoms, the worst books that I read in that month, the books that I do not recommend for a variety of reasons. My Tops and Bottoms wrap-ups is one of you guys' favourite things to see. You've been asking me for a while to bring them back, and so I have listened, and here they are. The only thing that isn't going to be included in this Tops and Bottoms is any book that I've talked about recently in a vlog. I've done quite a few vlogs over the last couple of months, and I talk really in depth about the books that I'm reading in those vlogs. So if you've already heard me talk about a book that I loved or a massive DNF in one of those vlogs, you're not going to find it here. This Tops and Bottoms is just going to be filling in all of the gaps of the books that I read and just didn't tell you about, and catching us back somewhat up to date. But before I launch into today's set of opinions, I first have to thank the sponsors of today's videos, Blackstone Publishing, and their wonderful book Pignon, Scorpion and the Barbershop Detectives. Because you see how this went down is Blackthorn went, "Hey, psst, Leanne," and I was like, "Yes," and then they were like, "You know how you like Agatha Christie?" And I was like, "Yes." And then they were like, "And you know how you like Sherlock Holmes?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then they were like, "What if we told you that we have a book in the tradition of Agatha Christie and in the tradition of the Sherlock Holmes books, but it's a new detective, a brand new detective, one that was written now?" And all of my Scottishness coalesced in the one place, and I went, "Geese it! Put it into my sticky hands, let it be mine." Pignon, Scorpion and the Barbershop Detectives is set in 1910 in a sleepy little English village, as all of the best Golden Age crime was. It follows Pignon Scorpion, who is the new kid on the block. He is an eccentric up-and-coming detective who is friends with John Watson and would love to make the acquaintance of Poirot himself. And through three devilish interconnecting mysteries, we watch Pignon Scorpion shock all of the villagers of this tiny little sleepy English hamlet as he and his cast of quirky associates solve fiendish cases. The vibes are immaculate, the characters are compelling, and the dialogue is a hit of pure nostalgia. So if you like all of the things that I like and you would like to get your hands on a classic throwback whodunit, then you can follow my link down below in the description to get a copy all of your own. And thank you so much once again to Blackstone for sending Pignon my way. Alright, time to get on to our Tops and Bottoms. The choices. Do we start with a piece of pure joy, or do we start with a salty bottom? Seeing as it's our first Tops and Bottoms in a while, let's start with a book that I absolutely loved. This is the Appendix by Konemann, and it is a non-fiction kind of memoir. In person, this is actually a tiny little pocket-sized book because it is one of the 404 Inklings series. 404 Inklings is published by a small press here in the UK, and they publish non-fiction of all different varieties. A lot of their books sit in kind of that niche of popular culture where we are kind of dissecting the things that we like. For example, they have this one that I've just picked up recently which explores queerness in D&D and the phenomenon that was that in the 80s. Not that it doesn't exist now, but you know, like it started in the 80s. Another one that I've read and absolutely thoroughly enjoyed is Love That Journey for Me, which is looking at Schitt's Creek and the queer phenomenon that it started in television. And so that gives you kind of a sense of the back catalogue that currently exists. But 404 Inklings are publishing more and more of these kind of like semi-memoir style mini non-fictions. The Appendix is subtitled Transmasculine Joy in a Transphobic Culture, and it is about Liam's experience as a trans man. In 2019, Liam started to keep a journal, a diary, of all of the transphobic things that he came across in his everyday life, in the media, things that he witnessed on the street, things that he saw in the news. And these were kind of like everything from casual acts of transphobia, so like really flip off the cuff comments that you would get from people who were just ignorant to the trans and queer experience. Also, some of them were things that were said directly to Liam, or some very like pointed, very destructive points of view that Liam came into contact with. But the problem that Liam found keeping this diary was that words really do have power, and that by constantly collating all of the bad things that happened and that Liam saw and experienced, it was creating this experience of transness which was wholly negative, in which no joy could possibly be found. And so Liam started to ask himself the question, how do you find trans joy? He started trying to actively seek out in all of these places where he had had these horrible experiences examples that counteracted them. And this wasn't just as an exercise in intellectualism, this was also an exercise in trying to save his mental health, because Liam had found it that by constantly looking at this day in and day out, he had just worn himself down to the point where he was wondering what literally the point was anymore. And Liam frequently throughout this book makes a point of being like, this is my experience, this is not everybody's experience, but this is what I see reflected in my community, and because of that I absolutely loved it. Liam's voice is a joy in and of itself, and this book is written just so well. I think one of the best things about the 404 Inkling series is because the authors have so little space to try and get their point across, they really have to learn a kind of economy with language whereby everything is a lot more compact than it would be in a longer form non-fiction. And because of that, it constantly feels like being punched in the face with these points that just blow the top off your head. I just think that this series of books is doing something really necessary in holding space for discussions that just wouldn't be published in a longer form way anywhere. But because they are bite-sized, they are so much more accessible. I read this one in an hour and I just came away with it with my mind reeling. If you guys have been around my channel for a while, then you already know that my own lovely spouse Harry has been on a journey himself with his sexuality and his gender, and he now identifies as a trans non-binary man. And even though I have been on this wonderful journey with Harry and I have got to experience all of the genuine joys and all of the truly mind-boggling ways that it has changed how Harry feels about himself, I still feel like I have so much to learn, because I am just a passenger on this journey. I am just in a back seat watching it happen. And this one definitely was another glimpse inside the experience that I think added to my own understanding. So if this is a subject that you think you are interested in, even if you do believe like me that you're quite educated on it, I still think that there are some points in it that it will give you that are things that you probably haven't thought of before. I really, really recommend it. It was just great. Also guys, I just glanced at a clip of this on the monitor and I'm so sorry that the front window is so reflective on my glasses. They're like anti-glare, but they're not like anti-light. I promise that if the sick puppy forces me to film down here more, that I will figure out a way to make this not happen and for us still to, you know, have illumination of some kind. Alright, next up on this list, let's just drop the bomb. Let's tell you about, I feel like I need some sort of fortifying liquid to get through this. Let's tell you about me DNFing one of my most anticipated books of the year, if not my absolute most anticipated book of the year. The book that I have gone on about ad nauseum since it was announced. The book that I was so annoyed didn't get sent to me on release date, even though I pre-ordered it to do so. Waterstones. And I'm so sorry to tell you that that book is The Family Remains by Lisa Jewell. You guys, I am gutted. Okay, let's take a grounding breath. So y'all know that Lisa Jewell is one of my favourite thriller authors in the world. I really do genuinely believe that for the most part she can do no wrong. There are some wobbly earlier books in her career, I will give you that. But anything that she's brought out in like her last 10 to 15 books, yes, 10 to 15, your girl is prolific, have just been absolute joys. I am tearing my way through her backlist. And you all also know that The Family Upstairs is one of my favourite thrillers in the world. And I have filmed my new top 10 thrillers video for you. I have indeed done that, and I will be bringing that to you very soon. The video exists, it's not been edited yet. So there's always a scary thing, right? When sequels come out to books which otherwise could be standalone, there's always a scary thing where it's like, is this possibly, does it have the ability to live up to the original? Can I love it as much? And you know, I've asked this question of myself with quite a lot of thrillers at this point. Quite a lot of the time the answer is no. And that, unfortunately, was exactly the case with The Family Remains. I was initially buddy reading this with Jean, and both of us jumped into it at the exact same time, both of us absolutely desperate to find out what was going to happen, and within the first 30 pages we had sent each other voice notes which was like, what is this? The Family Remains kicks off more or less from where the end of the first book left off. Some things have been kind of wrapped up, some monetary things have happened. But apart from that, we're basically exactly at the end of the last book, which I was thankful for, because either I want it to pick up immediately or I want it to take place several years in advance or several years before. I would even have accepted that. But the problem is, if you start a book pretty much at the end of where you left the last one off, your characters have to remain consistent. The voices have to sound like the voices of the characters that you had in the last book. Without giving any names, because names in and of themselves in this are spoilers, one of the main male characters sounds absolutely nothing like he did in the original book. Everything is different, from the way he constructs sentences to the thoughts that he has in his own head. In the original book, he's very creepy, very insidious, very underhanded. He feels very sort of ethereal, almost like you can never really get a handle on who he is. But in this book, he's just not that at all. He is actually a caricature of that character, and even worse, he's a queer caricature. He is all of the stereotypes of a gay man that I feel like existed in literature which came out in the early 90s. Things are effeminate when they should be effeminate. He's obsessed with the gym when he should be obsessed with the gym. He's getting older, so he's worried that the younger guys won't find him as attractive anymore. Literally everything about his queerness could have been lifted from a scene from like Queer as Folk, the original series. And it just felt so out of place. It just felt so clunky and uncomfortable. I had a couple of scenes in there where I was just like, this is actually making me feel like blah. That is perhaps not a very articulate summary of my feelings, but nevertheless, blah. And unfortunately, this just fed into my experience of other characters. So as they were all interacting with each other, I just didn't believe that some of the scenarios that Lisa Jewell set up could have existed with the characters that came from the original book. Additionally, speaking of characters that came from the original book, we suddenly got the point of view of a new character. A character who we knew existed but whose head we had never been in, and then we got her entire backstory, and I still don't know why. And to top it all off, there was a fairly gratuitous scene of sexual violence in here which I just don't understand the point of. Now obviously a lot of Lisa Jewell's thrillers do push boundaries. She deals with a lot of like quite taboo topics like incels and things like that, and so there are necessarily going to be scenes where there are, you know, violence and in some cases massive trigger warnings for sexual abuse and things like that. But normally they're presented in the context of the story, whereby they give you more information about what's going on. There's usually a reason for them, but this time around it just felt like this scene was written for the sake of writing it. It felt like it was written for the sake of being shocking rather than to convey any more information, and I really didn't like it. It made me feel very aware that there was an author of the book. I felt very aware that I was being told a story in this one rather than just like disappearing into the book. This genuinely was my most anticipated book of this year, and I don't know, it'd be like that sometimes, guys. But I would be really interested in hearing your opinions on this one. You guys know that I say that all the time. I really do mean it. I love opinions. But I would particularly like to hear your opinion on this one. I would particularly like to hear if you have really enjoyed this one, why it worked for you as opposed to all of the very many reasons that it didn't work for me. Okay, let's return to a happy place, a place of tops, and talk about a book that I didn't realise I had never included in a video before. I mentioned recently in a video that I did where I took you guys book shopping in Edinburgh with me that I literally scoured all over for the sequel to this one because I knew that the author had drawn on some of the copies that she'd left around some indie bookshops. After I mentioned that, a couple of my patrons had said that I'd never actually mentioned the first book and could I tell them more about it. And I cannot believe that I have not yet mentioned it in a tops and bottoms video because I loved it so much. That book is of course The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. I am not a huge historical fiction fan. I don't mind genre fiction when it is set historically, but historical fiction in itself, for the sake of being a portrait of the times, is something that I'm a little bit more iffy on. It doesn't always catch my imagination, especially if it's straight up historical fiction set anywhere before the Victorian era. When I heard about The Wolf Den, I was initially kind of scared. I had some skeptical parts, a few misgivings, shall we say, because this one is not a direct mythology retelling. It is instead simply about the women who lived in Pompeii, or rather about a certain class of women that lived in Pompeii, the women that we never talk about. The Wolf Den follows Amara, and she is a prostitute. She lives and works in a brothel in Pompeii, owned by a man who she absolutely despises. As with many women of the time, becoming a prostitute was not Amara's choice. Her father instead went bankrupt essentially, and she was sold to pay for some of his assets. And that is a big arc of this book, is that Amara has come from being a free woman to being a slave. She wasn't born a slave, and so the experience for her is very different from some of the women who she works with. One of my very, very favourite parts of this novel, if not my very favourite part, was the friendships between Amara and her fellow she-wolves. Because although they are in this horrendous situation that they have absolutely zero control over, that doesn't mean that they're broken. It doesn't mean that they're completely powerless. It doesn't mean that they don't want things for themselves or have hopes and dreams and aspirations. We are not just following Amara as she trips through one thing that happens to her to another. She has active agency. She wants things for herself, and she thinks that Pompeii is just full of opportunity and she just has to find the right one. And I loved a lot about this one, but one of the things that I loved the most about it was the way that Elodie Harper paints shades of grey on everything. No one person is solely good or bad. They are an amalgamation of their life experiences. And I thought, you know, there's a chance that this is just going to turn into a litany of every single man abusing Amara and Amara just having to put up with it. But it's not like that at all. The men who come into the brothel, although not all of them are kind, also do have their own lives outside of these situations. They are not all horrendous monsters. Some of them are people who are going through their own struggles, and I really loved that about it. And once again, harking back to the subject of gratuitous sexual violence, that was not something that I found in these pages. The things that happen that are horrible are necessary things to explain. And I did read an interview with Elodie Harper not that long after I picked up the second one in this series, which talked about her reasons for doing that, her reasons for not having constant sexual violence on the page, her reasons for doing fade to black in a few scenes. She was simply explaining that she wanted to be sensitive to these women's experience, but she wanted to honour the fact that the only time that we do talk about these women, the women who worked in brothels in Pompeii and places like that, is to talk about sexual violence and to talk about how they were used. It is never as a person, they're never as a whole human. It is just their function in society that we discuss. And she wanted to reclaim part of that story for the women that she was writing about, and I really loved that. It felt very sort of reminiscent of the purpose that Hallie Rubenhold had in The Five. Just, I absolutely adored it. I thought it was great. So yeah, I'm kind of glad that I hadn't mentioned this before, just so I got to like spew at you now how much I adore it. Alright, let's look at another bottom, and once again, I have opinions and I'm kind of angry about it. In fact, I'm kind of angry about all of the bottoms on this list, I'm not gonna lie. So without beating about the bush, the book that I am talking about is The Castaways by Lucy Clarke. I picked this one up for the mixtape-a-thon. I had a great hopes for it. It was essentially marketed a little bit like a locked room mystery meets Lost. This is about two sisters who are planning on going on holiday together. They're going to sort of like a very small idyllic island where they're going to have to do a couple of different connections to get there, and at the very last minute they have a massive argument, like a huge blowout argument, and they don't go together. One sister gets on the plane and one sister doesn't turn up to the airport because she's so angry. Problem is, however, that the plane crashes, the plane goes down, and the sister that is left at home, can you tell that I have forgotten both of their names because this was such a terrible book that I have just erased as much of it from the slate as possible. The sister who is left at home has all of these questions about what happened. I had so many issues with this book. I do not know where to start. This one started out as utilitarian, but it was fine. It moved very quickly and I was invested and I was interested, and there was enough interesting things about the character's internal world on the page that I could be lulled into believing in everything. And then we hit the 1/3 mark in this book and everything went to pot. Every single line in it was a cookie cutter cardboard cutout line, was a piece of dialogue that I just didn't believe existed. I couldn't hear people having that dialogue with each other. Nobody talks like that. It was so stilted. And it also got a little bit muddy in some places where I wasn't really sure where the scene was taking place or what was actually happening in it. And I hated that. I felt like I was just swimming in bad dialogue and plot and I had no idea how anything connected. And talking of the plot, before we finish on the thing that really annoyed me, the worst thing, I didn't believe it. The whole plot hinges on this thing kind of being like a cover-up of some kind. Like, nobody wants to investigate it, nobody will give any straight answers. There were just too many plot holes in it. Like, there were too many passengers on the plane that not a single one of their like friends or family wouldn't have pushed to find out what had happened. And by the time that we got to the point where she was like making her murder board with her pins and stuff like that on the wall, I was just like, nah, I'm out. Which is good, because that's also the part where this book committed one of the cardinal sins for me when it comes to thrillers with female characters. And that is equating the main character's worth solely with her ability to have a baby. As this book starts to go on, we get a flipped perspective, and we get the perspective of the sister who actually went onto the plane. And from the minute that she walks onto the page, all that she wants to talk about is babies. There's, funnily enough, coincidentally enough, a baby on the plane that she can like coo all over. And then as the plane is starting to crash, the thing that she's not worried about is she gonna die? What did she say to her sister is the last thing that she said to her sister. It was an argument, that's awful. All of these years that she's not going to get left, is it going to hurt? None of those things are the thing that she's thinking about. The thing that she's thinking about is, oh, I'm never going to become a mother. My worth will never have been fulfilled because I have never had a baby. And honestly, I about threw the book over the room. I DNF'd it immediately, and I didn't actually realise when I picked up The Castaways that I had You Let Me In on my shelves, also by Lucy Clarke, and I unhauled both of them immediately because I'm never trying anything by her again. You know how sometimes you hit an author and you're like, everything that you did in this book was so bad that we're over? Like, there's no second date for you and me. We are never ever getting back together. Now that brings me to the last top on my list, which does mean, yes, we are going to be finishing on the bottom. And I'm going to be really interested to find out whether the last top on my list is one that will surprise you or not. When I mentioned that I was reading this one, my friends split into two camps. Firstly, the camp of, that is so pretentious, you are going to absolutely hate it. And then secondly, the camp of, that is so dark and twisted, it is right up your alley. And both of those things kind of ended up being true. Well, not the so pretentious that I would hate it part, just the pretentious bit, because I didn't hate it. I absolutely loved it. Because my last top is the Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake. So similarly to Greek myth, Dark Academia has taken a huge spike in the last little while, which is absolutely delightful to me in my little black heart. Because I do love me some Dark Academia that leans on the gothic, oh yes. So in the Atlas 6 we follow 6 different characters. They are all very powerful and exceptional young people, and they have all been gathered in the one place by a man called Atlas Blakely. Atlas Blakely runs the Alexandrian Society, a society which exists solely to collate all of the great knowledge from humanity and to keep it safe. And when I say the knowledge of humanity, I mean the lost knowledge, the arcane knowledge, the knowledge that just isn't available in everyday life. This society is incredibly select, it is incredibly competitive. They do not just let anybody in to have access to this knowledge. And so we are witness to a competition between people who desperately want this job. They desperately want this position. They want to learn, which comes with, you know, a lot of problems. Now yes, it is absolutely true that this book is flowery and it is pretentious. It is definitely overwritten, but it is overwritten in a way that just produced for me the most excellent vibes, the most perfect vibes. I was just there chilling, waiting for the dark nights to set in and cackling along at all of the lies. Because lies, deceit, red herrings, flipped pages, that is the cornerstone of this entire plot. The way in which these 6 characters deceive each other and yet are actually deceiving themselves a lot of the time is oh. And it definitely did immediately bring me back to The Secret History. It was exactly the same sort of very toxic environment that was created by being pitted against each other. It also has a kind of underscore of, dare I say it, the Hunger Games, because they are all aware that one of the people who is in competition here is going to be eliminated before the end of it. Now you guys know that when I go into any kind of mystery books, I generally try and remain as ignorant as possible to the very last page. I don't want to try and put things together. I just want the author to be like, look, a plot twist, and me go, guess. But I was powerless in this one not to play detective. I was powerless in this one not to constantly be like, excuse me, what now? Ma'am, sir, what did you say? There is no way not to be suspicious of every single character in this book from the minute that they waltz onto the page to the very conclusion. I spent so much time being like, is it this? Is it this? But what about that? But ooh, that person said that. And that was really interesting to me because that doesn't often happen. I'm not often compelled to try and pick things apart. My only real complaint about this one was that there is a little bit of a lag in the middle. There's kind of like a sag, just a gentle sag right in the middle where I felt like it could have been paced a little bit better. There could have been a few reveals that were like shuffled around and I think it would have just made me push through. But luckily, because I was there for the vibes, because the atmosphere had captured me, I didn't mind all that much. And I was absolutely thrilled when the sequel to it landed on my doorstep. Thrilled. And I'm not gonna lie, I did mention when I picked up the hardback copy of this one that was signed earlier this month that I'm probably gonna reread it. This will be the second time that I have reread a book that I have already read this year. This is a new phenomenon for me. I don't usually do this. I usually leave time, like usually at least a year in between reading a book, or like I'll read it in preparation for the sequel coming out. But I liked it enough that I want to reread it now. That's not a recommendation, I don't know what is. Okay, and finally, last up on my list, my last bottom, which may also be a little bit shocking to you. So just sit back, take a load off, relax. I'm also desperately sorry that the lighting has got to this stage in the day, but with the sickly puppy, it's taken me so long to film this video. Every time I do a book, I then have to pause for ages and deal with them, so I'm very sorry that the lighting over the course of this video has just like gone into sepia tones. Okay, so my last bottom needs a little bit of explanation when it comes to the circumstances, because I feel like I need to let you know how thoroughly I gave this one a shot. So my last bottom is Confessions by Kanae Minato. This is of course a hugely popular little creepy psychological thriller. It has, I believe, been adapted into a Netflix show, but for me it was just that thriller that somebody told me about ages ago, which was sitting on my Kindle and which I hadn't touched. My Kindle is, as we have discussed before, the place where books go to die. So when lovely spouse Harry ended up in the hospital, it was of course an emergency situation and I did not have time to grab anything except for my phone. My phone was the only thing that I had on me. I was tired, I was sore from sitting on hospital waiting room seats the entire time. I was worried, and so I decided I would download the Kindle app on my phone again and I would download a book. As soon as I loaded up the app, the cover for this one caught my eye and I went, that one. I know that's meant to be a really twisty thriller. I will pick it up and it will fully transport me from this place. Believe me when I say that I gave this one the good freaking try of a lifetime, because I really wanted to be distracted. Like, I wanted to be distracted really badly. And for the first 1/3 of this book, it did exactly that. Confessions is a weird kind of stream of consciousness book. So it opens up with a teacher whose perspective we are reading from, talking to her class, and that is all it is. It is a stream of her dialogue to her class. There is zero description, everything comes from her lips. And she is telling the class a story. She is telling them that she is retiring, which they are very shocked about. Like, why would you retire? And through her narrative, we discover that her very young daughter died only last year in this very school, and that she believes that 2 of the students sitting in that class are responsible. But instead of naming these students, instead of calling them out and confronting them, she tells them a story in which she has already exacted revenge. They just don't know it yet. And like I said, that part of the narrative was so utterly compelling. I was hooked. It was so easy to read because it was just a dialogue of this person talking to the class. Because of that, there was no real like descriptive heavy stuff. It was just like, get the information into my brain. However, the thing that she did to gain revenge to me was A, so incredibly implausible, and in a way that she had already, in her narrative to these kids, had already explained to them all of the reasons why it was implausible and why it was probably not something that would ever happen to them. But B, so ridiculous. As soon as it landed on the page, I was like, really bitch, are we really going there? Really just kind of quite gross. And by gross, I don't mean like, ugh, gory, yuck, nasty. I mean like, the attitudes towards this particular topic were gross. This particular topic really affects the LGBTQIA++ community more than it does any other community. Because of that, because I know quite a lot about this topic, because I've read a lot about it when I've been reading about queer history and things like that, I just was so critical of the way that this was handled. But as I had already started it and it was just such a short book, I was like, look, I'm going to power through it and I'm going to read it all the way to the end. And I did, and I was not impressed. This book takes place very much in 3 acts, and the second act of the book leaves this initial point of view that we have. We are in a completely different place with a completely different narrative style, listening to completely different characters being talked about, and it was really jarring, like really jarring, and it felt like starting the book over again, which I was also very much not there for because I was bored by that point. I just wanted it to be over. And the ending of this, oh, the ending of this was so dumb. The choice that the character makes and the justification for why the character makes that choice was just so dumb. I hated it. I just hated it, and I can see why a lot of people didn't. I can see why this is as popular as it is, especially because it's so short. I feel like anybody who is new to the horror genre would particularly like this, or anybody who's new to Japanese thrillers and the particular tone that they have would also like this. But I feel like if you have read any kind of substantial stuff in the thriller or the horror genre, there's nothing new in this one. It's not going to give you anything that you haven't already read before. So that is it, guys. There is my first tops and bottoms wrap up for quite quite a while. I hope that you enjoyed coming on this salty journey with me. Again, if there are some books in here that you thought that I was going to talk about and I didn't, chances are that I talked about them in a vlog. As always, please tell me what you thought about the books that I read in this video. Were any of them surprise favourites? Did you expect me to love some of the bottoms more than I did? I would like to hear your opinions. And again, if you would like to get your hands on a copy of Pinot and Scorpion and the Barbershop Detectives, then don't forget to click my link down below. If you're new here and you enjoyed this, then please consider sticking around. There will be more tops and bottoms very soon. We are back in the rhythm, baby. And if you thought this video was kind of fun, then please hit that thumbs up because it really does help my channel. And I will speak to you all very soon, guys. Bye! My bum hurts so much sitting on this chair. If I have to film down here again, I'm gonna have to have a cushion because she's delicate, man.